Last summer, my family and I had the privilege, the opportunity to travel out west and saw some amazing things in our country. We had the opportunity to experience some really amazing things. It's an experience that I'm truly thankful for, but one of the funnest things about that entire experience was watching my family experience and see some of these things for the very first time. A lot of the stuff that we had visited, I had seen growing up. My parents did a lot of traveling when we were growing up, and so we got to see like the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone when we were growing up. But my family hadn't, and so to watch them experience it for the very first time was just a lot of fun. And to explain it to them, right, because they were wondering and imagining what these things would be like. What would it be like to see the Pacific Ocean and to step into it? Or what is Disneyland? How is that different than Disney World? Or what is it like to see an actual wild buffalo at Yellowstone? All these kind of things. I would describe them and do my best to do that in great detail. But it's just not the same, right? No matter how well you describe what it's going to be like, it's just not the same until you actually are there, until you actually experience it. We've been talking about what's on the other side, specifically the last several weeks, what's on the other side of this life. And for the believer in Jesus Christ, for the follower of Jesus, what's on the other side of this life is heaven. And so last week we talked a little bit about what heaven is going to be like. And it's one thing to imagine it, it's one thing to wonder and even to look at some of the amazing descriptions that we have in the Bible about heaven, but it's no matter how much detail that we are able to imagine and read, it's just not going to be the same until we're actually there and experience it. But I do think it's it's normal to wonder, it's normal to imagine what's it going to be like when we stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon, right? That's normal. And I think it's normal and natural to wonder and imagine about heaven. What I would like for you to do is join me in Matthew chapter 6 this morning, because I want to take that wonder, I want to take that imagination about heaven, and we're going to put something very tangible, very practical with it this morning. Nothing wrong with wondering, nothing wrong with imagining what heaven's going to be like. But Jesus instructed us to do more than that. Jesus gave us a challenge in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19, to move beyond living a life where we are focused on the here and now, maybe once in a while wondering or imagining about heaven. He wants us to do so much more than that. Matthew chapter 6, look at verse 19. Jesus said, "Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them, where rust destroys them, where thieves break in and steal. Instead," he says in verse 20, "store up treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also." Now, when I read that, I hope what comes across to you is the same challenge that comes across to my heart, and kind of, one of those kind of verses that kind of smacks you in the face if you're not ready for it. It's one thing to wonder and imagine about heaven and what it's going to be like, but Jesus says, no, I want you to do more than that. I want you to prepare to be there. I want you to prepare to be there. Jesus said, don't just stay focused on the treasures and the things that matter to you in this life. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Well, how do we do that? We're going to talk about that this morning. I want you to imagine my family, right, spending months and months looking forward to that trip out west, imagining what it's going to be like, even reading about details online or in travel books, or maybe listening to me describe what it was like, all of these things, and just wanting to be there and imagining how wonderful it's going to be, but never in all of those months doing anything to prepare. Never pack a suitcase. Never rent a car, never buy a plane ticket, never set aside any money to spend on the trip. Nothing. Then when the day finally comes for the big trip, everyone looks at each other and like, wow, we wasted all of that time wondering and imagining what it was going to be like, and we never took the time to prepare to actually be there. this morning, I want to wonder with you. I want to imagine with you. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it can be very exciting to think about heaven. But I want us to move beyond that this morning. I want us to think seriously about this question, about this challenge that Jesus poses for us. How do we prepare for heaven? How do we send ahead treasure in heaven and store it there? Sounds very spiritual, right? Sounds like something believers should probably do, but how do we actually do that? I'm going to be ripping through a lot of Bible verses this morning, and the speed is going to be a lot more rapid than normal. Okay, so I'm going to offer you a couple suggestions. If you have a tablet, if you have a phone, and you go to our digital notes this morning on the bulletin, you go to the website, find the digital bulletin, you'll find the sermon notes there. You might be able to keep up. I'm just telling you, I'm going to be ripping, and we're going to be moving fast. You might be able to keep up if you follow along, because I'm going to be reading from the same notes that you're reading from when it comes to the verses. If you can't keep up, I'm just asking you, don't get frustrated, right? Don't throw stuff at me, because I'm not going to slow down. Just listen, all right? If that's easier for you to just listen, know that all the verses are going to be on here. You can look at them later. The reason I'm doing so much Bible reading this morning, rather than just kind of telling you what's there, I'm going to read a lot of them, is based on what we talked about last week. We said at the very beginning last week, where are you getting your information about heaven? That matters. And so many people in our culture, even sometimes in our churches, they're getting their information about things like heaven from Hollywood. It's a terrible place to get your information about heaven. And so I just want you to understand what we're talking about today. I don't have a lot of solid answers on some of this stuff. We're just going to have to live with the tension of not knowing. But what information I am going to share with you, I got out of the Bible. It's not Mark's personal opinion. I didn't get it from a movie somewhere. Okay? So just be prepared for that. We're going to start with where we left off last week. The question that many of you, maybe you've been up all week wondering the answer to this question: will there be baseball in heaven? Right? It's like this big cliffhanger from last week. Some of you didn't sleep all week. Some of you are wondering, are we even going to have baseball here on earth in any time soon, right? Maybe not. I don't know. But when we talk about things like sports in heaven, is that a possibility? Well, there's no reason why there couldn't be sports in heaven. Sports in and of themselves are not inherently sinful or evil. If there is sports in heaven, I want you to imagine taking sports, taking athletic competition, and removing the corruption of sin from it. Just imagine if you have sports with no more greed. Imagine if you have sports with no more jealousy, with no more parents acting like maniacs in the stands. Imagine experiencing sports in that type of environment where it's just the joy of the game. Win or lose, doesn't matter. You're there truly to have fun. We say that, and you all know it's baloney, right? You say it's just to have fun. It's just for the fun. Yeah, right. You're keeping score for a reason. We all know we want to pound the other person into the ground, right? Imagine if it's just the fun of the game and just enjoying the competition. I don't know if there's sports in heaven for sure, but one of the things that makes sports a lot of fun is reward, right? That's why we keep score. We keep score so at the end of the competition, we know who won the competition so that we can give that person or that team a prize, so we can give them a reward. And one of the things that we do know about heaven is that there will be rewards, prizes, so to speak, eternal treasure given in heaven. If you look at some of the verses in your digital notes, I'm going to rip down through a few of these. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, when people persecute you, when people mock you for your faith in Jesus, he says in verse 12, be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. If you look at Revelation 22, verse 12, Jesus says, I'm coming soon, bringing my reward with me to repay all people according to their deeds. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, I love this passage. This is one of those passages that I think every believer should spend some time with this week and just reflect on your walk with Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, starting in verse 10, Paul writes, because of God's grace to me, I've laid a foundation like an expert builder. Now, others are building on it, but whoever is building on this foundation must be very careful. Here's the foundation. Foundation level is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then we build on that. In other words, it's not just we've said the sinner's prayer, we've accepted the gospel, we believe in Christ's blood and the sacrifice that He made for us. We believe all that, we've accepted it. He says that's the foundation level, yes, the gospel, but then we build on that, right? That's not the end of your journey of faith, it's the beginning. And you have the opportunity, you have the choice of how you're going to build, how you're going to live your life from the moment you've trusted Jesus until the day you die or the day He returns. You and I all have that choice of how we're going to live our lives and what we're going to build with. He says there's a variety of building materials. Some have value, some don't, like gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, straw. Some of those have a lot of value, eternal value, and some of it just doesn't. But on Judgment Day, and we're going to talk about that in the next passage, what Judgment Day are we talking about? On Judgment Day, when we stand before Christ as believers, because that's who we're addressing here, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The builder will receive a reward based on the choices that we've made and how we lived our lives and what we did with the opportunity and the resources, the talents, the gifts that God has entrusted to us. If the work survives, in verse 14, the builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. Listen, the builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. When we think about that, I think it's important that every believer take time to reflect on this passage when it comes to our walk with Christ. There's reward in heaven. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 and 10, we see what Judgment Day we're talking about. So Paul writes, whether we're here in the body or away from the body, our goal is to please Him, right? That makes sense. As a follower of Jesus, that should be our daily goal. And then he says this in verse 10, this is a day that's coming for every believer, for we all must stand before Christ to be judged. We will each receive whatever we deserve for the good or evil we have done in this earthly body. So the Bible describes this reward ceremony in heaven. It'll take place in heaven immediately after the rapture of the church. It's what's called the judgment seat of Christ, where Jesus will judge believers for our conduct, for our work, for how we use the resources and opportunity and gifts that He entrusted to us. And we'll develop that throughout the verses that we're going to look at today. We'll kind of fill in the blanks with some of that, but it's important you understand that this is not a judgment of salvation. This is a judgment of reward. The judgment of salvation, that's already been taken care of the moment that we trust Jesus Christ to apply His righteousness to our bankrupt account. At that moment, God declares us to be justified by the blood of Jesus. There's this reward ceremony that's going to take place in heaven. It's really, really important that you take the information that we're about to look at and understand that there's a practical nature to it. Because here's the danger. We're going to read through these eternal reward, these heavenly crowns. We're going to look at them in detail from how the Bible describes them. And the temptation is, oh, that's cool, that's interesting, and we don't do anything with it. But that's not what Jesus wants us to do with this information. Jesus says, don't store up treasure here on earth, things that don't have eternal value. Store up treasure in heaven, because those things have eternal value. And we're about to look at the things that have eternal value. We're about to look at the very practical nature that are represented by these crowns of the things that you and I can actually do on a day-to-day basis to store up treasure in heaven. Right? So just go into it understanding that this is part of the challenge. Here we go. The first one is 1 Corinthians 9. In 1 Corinthians 9, it talks about what's called the victor's crown. 1 Corinthians 9, all athletes are disciplined in their training. We know that. And they do it to win a prize that will fade away. That's earthly treasure. That's stuff that won't last, right? But we do it. What do? We are disciplined in our training, spiritual training, for an eternal prize. So Paul says, I run with purpose every day. I'm not just going through the motions of my Christian faith. I discipline myself. The victor's crown that's described here is awarded to those who are seeking personal discipline and sacrifice and self-control in their lives. They're the people that say no to sin. They're the people who say yes to what is right, yes to what is best. It's really what we try to summarize in our statement of living a Jesus-centered life. When you pursue living a Jesus-centered life, the reward for that daily is the victor's crown. And that requires personal discipline and self-sacrifice and self-control. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 talks about the crown of rejoicing. After all, Paul writes, what gives us hope and joy, and what will be our proud reward and crown as we stand before our Lord Jesus when He returns? He says it's you. He's talking to the believers in Thessalonica. He's like, you are that reward. We shared the gospel with you, and you responded to the gospel, and there's reward for that. The crown of rejoicing is given to those who play their part in helping other people meet Jesus and respond to the gospel. So when you share your faith, when you live out your faith with others and you talk to them about the gospel, there's a reward for that in heaven. There's the crown of righteousness in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8. Paul writes to Timothy, now the prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on the day of His return. And that prize is not just for me, he says. It's for all who eagerly look forward to His appearing. There's two things happening. It's called the crown of righteousness, so we would understand that to mean doing the right thing, even when no one's looking, right? Crown of righteousness, saying no to sin, saying yes to what is right. But it's connected to those who are eagerly looking forward to His appearing. If you're truly expecting Jesus to come back, like you really believe that He could come back any day, any moment, and you live your life like that, like in response to that truth, in response to that reality, it affects your decision making, it affects your priority making, how you use your time and your resources, the way you treat others, because Jesus could come back at any moment, and you live your life in that reality. There is a crown for that, the crown of righteousness. The crown of life is described in James chapter 1, verse 12. God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love Him. This crown of life is mentioned again in Revelation 2:10. Don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. He's talking about persecution. The devil will throw some of you into prison to test you. You'll suffer for 10 days. But if you remain faithful, even facing death, I will give you the crown of life. The crown of life is given in recognition of those who endure temptation and trial and persecution, even to the point of death. One more we'll look at, crown of glory in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1. And now a word to you who are elders in the church. He said, I too am an elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ. I too will share in His glory when He is revealed to the whole world. As a fellow elder, I appeal to you. Care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly. Not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care, but lead them by your own good example. When the great shepherd appears, isn't that what we've been talking about? You will receive a crown of never-ending joy and honor. This crown of glory, this crown of joy is a reward for Christian leaders, for those who are faithful shepherds of God's people. Now, you would automatically probably think of pastors, and certainly would include them, but it also, I believe, would include others who care for and lead and teach others in the local church, like small group leaders, children's ministry leaders. So I don't know if there are going to be sports in heaven or the excitement of winning a trophy in a championship game. But we do know for sure that there are going to be these reward crowns that we just read about. And they're going to be given out, and I think what's important to understand about that list, it's not a list of bonus points. It's not a list of extra credit, because I think that's how some Christians look at it. I said the salvation prayer, and I'm just going to sit here and wait till I die. I'm looking forward to heaven. And that's not what God expects of us. What He expects of us is what He says here in Matthew chapter 6. Store up treasure in heaven. That's what he expects of us. Prepare yourselves for that day when these crowns, where these eternal rewards are going to be given out. And there's very practical ways that you and I can earn those crowns every single day. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to take what we just talked about, and we're going to explore heaven a little bit more. We're going to talk about some of the exciting, amazing things about heaven. Explore maybe some fun topics that you wouldn't normally think about when it comes to heaven. And as we do it, we're going to keep coming back to what Jesus said here in Matthew 6. We're going to keep coming back to these list of crowns, these eternal rewards, these treasures in heaven that God expects us to store in heaven. How's this question? Is there going to be work? Is there going to be rest in heaven? What are we going to do? We're just going to float around on a cloud for all of eternity? We'll float around and we'll play a harp, or maybe we'll swing in a hammock on a beach and we'll be bored to death for all of eternity. Is that what heaven's going to be like? Hebrews chapter 4, verse 11, right out of the gate, talks about rest. We know that there is going to be rest in heaven. In fact, all through those first 11 verses, the word rest is mentioned over and over and over again. There's going to be rest in heaven. Revelation 14:13 talks about how we will rest from our hard work, for the good deeds, their good deeds follow them. There's going to be rest in heaven. Now, we might not sleep in the same way that we do now, but there's going to be rest. Is going to be part of our eternal experience. But we got to balance that with another reality, is there will be meaningful work. So there'll be this balance between rest and meaningful work. Matthew chapter 25, if you look at that verse on your notes page, Matthew 25:19, the master, this is a story Jesus told about this master that goes away. He's talking about himself. Goes away for a long time. And he entrusts his servants with certain, in this case, in the story, a certain amount of money. So in our case, it would be gifts, talents, opportunity, resources. He's entrusted to us to use in this life for his glory, to earn the crowns that we talked about. That's what he's entrusted us while he's away until he comes back. Jesus says here in the story, the master comes back and he says to some of these servants, he says, you took what I gave you, you put it to use, and you did some amazing things with it. He says, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling the small amount. Now I will give you many more responsibilities. Well, when? When we're with Jesus in heaven, there'll be more to do. There'll be work. There'll be responsibility. And the amazing thing about work in heaven, this responsibility will be without frustration. It will be meaningful. It will be fulfilling. I don't know if you feel like the work you do now is fulfilling or meaningful or not. Maybe you do. But imagine the experience in heaven when work is fulfilling, it's meaning, it doesn't wear us out emotionally or physically, because it's all balanced with this perfect rest that God provides. It's an incredible experience to think about. Here's the question. When I go back to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 about storing treasure in heaven, I'm wondering this. What if we didn't have to wait until we got to heaven to start working for the glory of God? What if that was our attitude now with the work that we do? And yes, I understand every believer should be participating in ministry within the local church, so that's a given. But I'm talking about the work that you do throughout the week, whatever it is. I don't know if you feel like it has meaning. I don't know if you feel like you're accomplishing something of significance or just going to get a paycheck. I don't know how you view your work. But what if you viewed your work every day as a way to glorify God, as an opportunity to be light in a dark place, as an opportunity to represent your Savior, as an opportunity to give God your best, and be an ambassador for what it looks like to be a Christian, a follower of Jesus. Think about some of the things that happen maybe in your workplace where people are treated poorly, where people are treated unfairly. Think about the opportunity that you might have to stand up for that person and to be light in that dark situation. When we think about work, we think about rest. I'm just going to ask myself the same question I'm asking you. How do we use our work and our rest experiences in this life, how do we use that to prepare for heaven, to send ahead treasure in heaven? We can do it by some of those things that we just talked about. Here's another question, I think an interesting one about heaven. What about time? Is there going to be time in heaven? Revelation chapter 7, verse 15, talks about God's throne and that we'll be serving Him day and night. Day and night are measurements of time. In Revelation 22, verse 2, it talks about bearing crops of fruit, fresh crop every month. Month is a measurement of time. In Isaiah 66, it talks about worshiping God week to week, month to month, measurements of time. In Revelation 8:1, there's a scroll that's opened, and there's this judgment that happens during the tribulation, and it says it was so bad there was a half hour of silence in heaven. There's a measurement of time. Now, here's the thing about time when it comes to eternity. It's kind of a tricky subject in this sense. We are talking about eternity, right? So there's not like an end to it. And we're talking about bodies that don't wear out, bodies that don't die. So in some sense, on some level, time does become somewhat irrelevant. But time really isn't the problem. It's the curse of sin on time in our present experience that is the problem. Imagine when the curse of sin is lifted from time. Imagine when time no longer works against us, when we no longer feel like we are running out of time. Do you ever feel that way? Like you're running out of time in what you're trying to accomplish, or maybe in your life as you get older. Right? I feel that. I feel that as I get older and older, I'm probably closer to the other side than I am to this life when it comes to time. It's exciting to think about an experience where time no longer works against us, that it's no longer an issue, that we feel like we're running out of it all the time, that we're not so busy, that we're not going to accomplish what we really want to accomplish. But here's the question. We go back to what Jesus said in Matthew 6. How are you using your time now to send ahead treasure in heaven? You have a limited amount of time. You have a limited resource in life right now with your time. But you can choose to make an eternal impact with how you use it. Or you can make the choice to do the other thing that Jesus said, store up treasure here on earth. He says, don't do that, but a lot of people do. When it comes to time, they're only focused on the here, on the now, and on how they want to use their time without giving a thought to how they should be using time for something that's of eternal worth and value. What are you doing with your time now? Do you waste time storing up treasure here on earth for yourself in ways that it's not going to matter in eternity? How about this question? It's a little deeper. Some of you might want to take it with you, write it down, and think about it this week, or even have a good conversation over lunch. It's a little bit deeper of a question. What would you do for God's glory? Like if time was not an issue for you right now in this life experience, if time was not an issue, right? You're not too busy, you have an unlimited amount of time, what would you do for God's glory? Because a lot of people say, well, I would do this for God if I had more time, right? You've maybe said that. Well, if time was no longer an issue for you, what would you do for God's glory? Why not start it now? Why not get after it now? You think about what Jesus said in Matthew 25. He says, I gave you this small amount, this small resource, and you did some amazing things with it. Now I'm going to give you more responsibility that you can use in the kingdom. Imagine starting it now, getting after it now, and then having all of eternity to continue doing something incredible for God's glory. I lumped a bunch of these other questions into one category of good things. There's a lot of good things that you and I experience in this life that we do enjoy. I understand the world seems like it's upside down right now, and there's a lot of things that are frustrating and maybe scary for some of us. And that's a reality for sure, but there's a lot of amazing, beautiful, wonderful things about our world and that we get to experience, and they are good gifts from God. There are good gifts in nature that we can enjoy and experience. There are good gifts in our relationships. There's a lot of good things that God has blessed us with. So I'm just going to walk down through some of them And well, let's wonder together. Let's imagine together. Will there be continuity with some of this stuff in heaven? Will we experience some of these things in heaven? How about the sun and the moon? Sun and the moon are nice. They're certainly pleasant experiences in this world. I enjoy the sun. I enjoy the beauty of a full moon. I'm sure maybe some of you too do as well. If you go to Revelation 21, it says this, the city, what city are we talking about? The New Jerusalem, the one that's come down from heaven that we looked at last week in the new heaven and the eternal earth. The city has no need of sun or moon. The glory of God illuminates the city, and the Lamb is its light. Same thing in Revelation 22:5. There will be no night there, no need for lamps or sun, for the Lord God will shine on them. Isaiah 60 says this, no longer will you need the sun to shine by day, nor the moon to give its light by night, for the Lord your God will be your everlasting light. It's an interesting thing. It doesn't actually say that they don't exist. It just says that there's no need of them. I went back to the creation story. I looked at Genesis chapter 1. And when you read through the creation story, the first thing that's created is light. Let there be light. Light's good. What's interesting to me is that the sun, the moon, the stars, these things aren't created until day 4. In fact, plants precede in the creation story the sun. It's a day. I understand it's only a day, but it's just interesting that light existed before sun and moon. It wasn't necessary for there to be light on the earth because it was God's presence. It was His glory that created that light. So I don't know. Maybe there will be stars and planets, perhaps, but it won't be necessary. Just like you don't need to take a lantern outside in the middle of the day to be able to see to read. Right? Even if the lantern exists and it's producing light, it's not necessary. Will there be oceans? Some of you have been waiting for this one. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 1, then I saw a new heaven, a new earth. The old heaven, the old earth disappeared, and the sea was also gone. And all the beachgoers collectively went, ugh. One of the interesting things about the next chapter, though, is in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 22, it talks about this river. So it's not like water goes away. There's this mighty river that runs right down through the middle of the city of the New Jerusalem. Where do great rivers end up? Well, they end up in big lakes oftentimes. We're talking about freshwater lakes. And there's some incredible, beautiful freshwater lakes that exist today. And they have beaches, right? And they're a wonderful, beautiful place to enjoy. We're going to look at a verse a little bit later that talks about the Dead Sea, which is a sea that exists now, that the salt content is so high in it that nothing can live. Fish can't live in it. And there's going to be a day coming in the new earth where it says that the Dead Sea will be fresh water and it will have lots and lots of life in it. All right? So there you have an experience in the future that's described where there will be a sea or a large body of water. Just apparently, it appears as though not salt water. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. Will there be weather and will there be seasons? Ezekiel chapter 34. If you go all the way down, it starts in, Ezekiel chapter 34. The second part of verse 26 is a good place to jump in. And in proper season, right? Season, I will send the showers, that's weather, that they will need. And there will be showers of blessing. It talks about bumper crops and these huge crops. What a blessing. Send showers in their seasons. One interesting thing, though, about an experience with seasons and weather without death is that people aren't going to die from the seasons and from the weather. Right? No tornadoes or hurricanes, tsunamis, drought, or famine. How about this? Books, music, creative works. If you look through a number of passages starting in Revelation 7, it talks about serving God day and night, which is an active process. It's not a passive thing where we float around on clouds. There's active serving God. And we know that service to God, there's a lot of creativity because there's different gifts and different abilities and different rewards that are given. So there's creativity in all of that as we serve God. There's worship in Revelation 22, verse 3. There's singing in Psalm 104. right? There's trumpets in Revelation chapter 8. There's other verses that talk about harps. There's musical instruments. So as we serve God and we take the continuity of the way that God has gifted us and our personality and all of that into the new life, removing the curse of sin, there's going to be some amazing creative work that will be done in heaven. What does that mean, though, for our experience? Imagine reading a brand new book from C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you read some of his works that he did in this life, but imagine reading a brand new novel series from C.S. Lewis. Imagine all the cool songs that Matt Redman has written, or Fanny Crosby, some of the amazing hymns. Imagine the continuity of that into eternity and some of the incredible music that we will enjoy in heaven. Good things. How about this one? Will there be coffee in heaven? Really, really important. Some of you lost sleep on this question throughout the week. Will there be coffee in heaven? Well, you go back to the creation story, we see that when God created seed-bearing plants, He said that it was good. So what God created, coffee being one of them, was good. God looked at maybe you don't drink it, maybe you don't care, but for those of us, this matters to us, right? So just give us this one. We're excited to know that God, when He created everything, that it was good. And then we get into the New Testament, and we see in 1 Timothy chapter 4 that it says everything God created is good. We're not to reject it. We're to give thanks and receive it with thanks. And, of course, we see that there are fruit and crops and things like that in eternity. So I'm going to make an assumption that, yes, not only will there be coffee, it'll be the best coffee that we have ever experienced. How about this one? Will there be Taco Tuesday? All right, so you're going to need to work with me on this one, okay? Will there be Taco Tuesdays? A lot going on with this one. Just take Tuesday for the first thing. That means that there's time. I don't know if the days of the week will be the same. I don't know if time will be measured in the same way. But we do know that time exists, so it's possible there could be some days set aside, right, for something as fun as Taco Tuesday. But what do we do with the taco? What do we do with eating something or the subject matter of meat? Let's walk through it together. Some of you are like, I don't care, I don't like tacos. Just stick with it, all right? There's a bigger point on the other side of it. Philippians 3:21 tells us that our bodies are going to be transformed to the likeness of the resurrected body of Jesus. Our bodies, our resurrected bodies, will be like His. Now, we're not going to be divine. We're not going to be like God in that in every way. But in a lot of ways, as image bearers of God, we'll have our resurrected bodies will be similar to the resurrected body of Jesus. And when you look at John 21, we see that He ate breakfast with His disciples. In Luke 24, we see that Jesus ate broiled fish in the presence of His disciples. So His resurrected body had the capacity, the ability to eat food. Matthew chapter 8 talks about a feast in heaven. Revelation 19 talks about a banquet in heaven in honor of Jesus Christ. So there's definitely evidence to suggest that we will have the capacity, the ability to eat and enjoy. Now, how does that all work physically? I don't know. We'll find out when we get there. But let's talk about meat, because that one's a little more complicated. You go back to Genesis chapter 1 when it comes to the dietary habits of Adam and Eve and all of creation. It was a vegetarian diet. The people were vegetarians, the animals were vegetarians, and that changes after not only changed after the fall, after sin entered the world for animals, but didn't really change for mankind until after the flood. But what do we do with passages like Isaiah 25? Isaiah 25 talks about eating the best of meats in heaven at this feast. So according to Isaiah 25, the best of meats, what else would you do with that but to say that there's going to be some form of meat? Now some have said, well, maybe that's in the millennium, maybe it's not the final earth. I don't know. I just know the verses there, and it creates some tension. Ezekiel chapter 47 talks about fishermen who are catching fish. Remember I said about the Dead Sea and all of these new experiences in heaven. Well, these fishermen are catching fish. The way it's written doesn't look like a catch and release kind of situation. What do you do with this one? Look at Isaiah, if you want to check this out with me. Isaiah 25, chapter 65, verse 25, says, "The wolf and the lamb, they will feed together." Not the wolf feeding on the lamb, but they feed together. The lion is going to eat hay like the cow. So the dietary habits of animals apparently change. Will ours? At the end of all that, my answer is, I don't know. I'm just hoping that it doesn't turn out to be some like meat substitute situation or like we're eating soy burgers or something like that. I'm just kind of hoping it's not that. Whatever it is, it's going to be good, though. Whatever it is, it's going to be good. How about this? One more, when it comes to good things that we experience and continuity from this life into the next. How about pets? How about animals? We do know from Romans chapter 8, it says that creation was subjected to God's curse. But with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. So there will be a time in the new heaven, the new earth, where creation is restored, where there is no death and decay among all of creation, which is a pretty incredible thing. So there's restoration there, and that says that creation is groaning for that day to come. And we just saw a verse that talks about animals in heaven, represented in Isaiah 65. But what about cats? I mean, let's be honest. What about cats? Sure, there's cat. Lion technically is a cat, and it's in the Bible. So, but we do know this because the curse of sin is removed. Cats won't be terrible anymore, right? So that's a good thing. And on top of that, my attitude won't be so terrible because the curse of sin will be removed from me and my horrible attitude, right? And I won't think this way anymore. But what about your pet? If you've had a pet that you've loved and that pet has died, that's a really, really sad thing, a really sad experience. And, do dogs go to heaven? Do our pets go to heaven? Here's what I would say. There's not a Bible verse that's going to tell us one way or the other, but could God do that? Could God recreate your pet and give it to you as a gift of love just because He loves you and you're one of His kids? If God wanted to do that, if He chose to do that, could He? He chose to, He could, right? So we'll wait, we'll see what happens when we get there. Whatever it's going to be, whether what we're eating or what we're experiencing or what we're seeing, we know that these are all good, amazing gifts. We go back to the tension of Matthew chapter 6. You have good gifts in your life right now. You have some really good gifts in your life right now. What are you doing with them to store up treasure in heaven? Are you taking the good gifts that you have, that God has given you in this life, are you using the good gifts for noble purposes or for sin? Right? Because there's some good gifts that in moderation, and there's ways that you can enjoy good gifts without sinning. There's other gifts where it's a good gift that you could use for enjoyment and to bless other people, but sometimes we use good gifts from God, and it's all about our pleasure. It's all about us and our experiences, and we don't even think about using them for God's glory. We don't think about using them to bless other people. What are you doing with the good gifts that God has entrusted to you now to bless other people and to gain reward in heaven? I think there's a lot of really great questions that we could ask about heaven. I don't think there's anything wrong with wondering and imagining how incredible it's going to be in heaven. But I do think this. I believe that God does not want us to spend all of our time just imagining and wondering how great heaven will be to the point where we neglect actually preparing to go and be there. Where we have neglected these crowns, these eternal crowns, in pursuit of them on a daily basis. I don't think any of them are intended to be a one and done. Okay, there's 5 on there. Check them off the list. Good. Now I can die and go to heaven. I think it's a daily expectation that God would have of us that every day we're looking, how can I send treasure ahead in heaven instead of just focus on the here and now and what I'm experiencing in this temporary life? I'd like to give you kind of a tangible way to do that, because I told you before, I think a lot of us sometimes get into this mode of life where we treat all these gifts like it's a bonus point, like it's extra credit. Take it or leave it, right? Just kind of ride along. You said the sinner's prayer and you're good. That's not what the Bible teaches us. That's certainly not what Jesus says here. There's an expectation that we build on that. So I want to give you something tangible I think might be heaven. I have this smartwatch, and it tracks things throughout the day for me. So it tells me how many steps, and every once in a while it'll buzz, and this thing will go around and said, you achieved your movement goal. Or the weird one is it says, hey, you breathed good today. Well, I don't know, whatever. I don't really think about breathing, but yay, I breathed good. So it tracks all these kind of things, and what's nice about it is it's a daily reminder of some of those healthy goals that I do want to achieve in my life. And I don't have anything cool like that for your watch, but I do have what I'm calling, it's a piece of paper back there. It's also on the digital bulletin if you want to check it out there. This treasure in heaven, I'm calling it my daily dashboard. And all it is just a way to keep track of all the crowns that we talked about today. So the primary verse is on there just as a reminder to you that Jesus expects us to store up treasure in heaven, to not stay focused on every treasure here on earth, but to stay focused on eternity. And then how do we do that? Well, we look at all of these crowns that are mentioned and described in Scripture, and we can look at that on a daily basis. Was I disciplined today? Was I self-controlled today? Did I say no to sin today? Did I say yes to what is good and right and best? Did I do that today? Did I help other people? Did I share my faith? Did I help them meet Jesus today? Right? We could ask ourselves that every single day. We could ask ourselves, did I live today like I really believed Jesus could come back at any moment? Or did I kind of forget that for a little while I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing? Did I endure temptation? Did I endure trial today? Did I endure persecution? Or did I back away from sharing my faith because I was embarrassed? Because I didn't want someone to make fun of me. I didn't want someone to criticize me, so I just kept my mouth shut. Did I serve God's people in some way today? Right? These are tangible things that we could evaluate. And here's my fear. My fear is that a lot of us are going to wait until the judgment seat of Christ before we ever take 1 minute to evaluate these things. And at that point, what's done's done. It's going to be what it's going to be. You know, there's that passage that we looked at, and for some, the experience is going to be, the builder is saved, but like one escaping through the flames. I don't want that to be my experience. I don't want that to be your experience. Don't wait until you get to heaven and you stand before Christ and then think about how I live my life. It's too late. This is something that we can do, that we have the ability to make choices and evaluate on an everyday basis. And I hope this is just a tangible tool. Throw it in your Bible, put it on your fridge, look at it every day. How did I do? Did I send some treasure to heaven today?